When you hear the word conspiracy, what do you think? Do you think of rich, powerful men in darkened rooms chomping on cigars, planning some nefarious event? If so, that's pretty good. I mean, there are various ways you can think about conspiracies. There are true conspiracies, and there are conspiracy theories, which may be true, but probably aren't. For example, let's define these terms in a clear, concise way. The moon landing hoax, the idea that the moon landing is a fictional event arranged by NASA using tens of thousands of scientists from different fields, using the powers of big business, all intended to fool the American people and the Soviets for some reason, and the Soviets somehow bought it and didn't have problems with it, and you could listen in on it from home if you had the right kind of radio. All of that just fake. It's all for nothing. It's fakeness, apparently. That's a conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theories are wild, wild leaps of logic that, when you do the most rudimentary critical thinking about them, they usually fall apart. Not always, but usually. But there are what you could call true conspiracies. A good example of that would be how the Soviet intelligence services used the moon landing hoax stuff to discredit the United States. They literally used that as a propagandistic tool. Now, the difference here is a simple one. There is a paper trail directly to the Soviet intelligence services. In reality, it was probably no more than a couple dozen people involved in helping spread this. Granted, they did have a lot of money behind them, they had a lot of broadcast tools behind them, they had a lot of propagandistic resources, but in the end, it was probably no more than a couple dozen people who knew about it, and that information came out after the fall of the Soviet Union. That's the problem with true conspiracies. If something is a real conspiracy, it's very hard to keep under wraps for very long. Which leads us to what I discovered. Not long after the Great American Eclipse, I did a video called Going Blind for Q, where I talked about a number of QAnon adherents who had come to believe the media was lying about the sun being harmful to your eyes. I said repeatedly, do not look at the sun. Don't do it. There are people who sun gaze, who look at the sun because they believe it gives them some special benefits of some kind. But really all it will give you is cataracts and possibly blindness. As was shown in the video, it's actually a pretty interesting video if you want to go back and watch it. These people, they would report after the eclipse, after looking up at the sun during the eclipse, that they had blind spots and such. It's actually quite terrifying stuff. This is the problem with reality testing failing. You forget that actually, your actions can have real consequences, that sometimes it is better to be safe than sorry. But I mentioned that video to get to what I'm talking about, which is, I found something really interesting from these QAnon people. QAnon is a conspiracy that the elites are all satanic lovers of children, and they drink their blood and stuff. It's very bizarre stuff. It's very perplexing. It's almost a religion at this point, and there's all kinds of stuff peripheral to it. For example, there is another set of conspiracies called NESARA GESARA, the idea that soon the government is going to dissolve and go back to its original form and give you a bunch of money. I mean, give the righteous a bunch of money. The non-righteous, of course, will perish, as is tradition. In some cases, I've seen this one person I follow, Lonnie, the star of that other video, say that millions of people are going to be taken to Guantanamo Bay and unalived, let's just say. So it's some really wild out there stuff, and I watch her page religiously. I am fascinated by it. I am fascinated by the constant failures of this reality testing, the lack of reality. I'm fascinated by these QAnon people and how reality seems to slip by them at every turn. So, really, what got me on this little rabbit hole here was, there was a guy that Lonnie had reposted, a random guy that I'd never seen before, but I watched the video. It was a little TikTok video, and here is that video.
What if I told you you were worth millions of dollars and you didn't even know it? And what if I could prove it to you? And that you have a trust fund, and you're all trust fund babies. And that trust fund is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And so when you signed that mortgage, they borrowed out of your trust fund, paid it off. And then you just keep paying it back. And paying it back.
So what, you might be asking? He's just some sovereign citizen weirdo into the NESARA GESARA stuff, and likely taking people for a ride, because he does take people for a ride. Apparently, he sells courses and who knows what else. He's always bragging on his page that he helped people make millions of dollars, and usually it's something like, I helped this guy make $1 million and he treats me bad now and just threw me under the bus. Do I have a right to feel angry? He was a truth seeker, a truth teller. I helped him, and all that money I helped him make. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Don't you want to make some money? And whenever people ask, oh, how do I access this trust fund? He says, well, message me, and I will let you know how to access your trust fund. And of course, it's a scam. It's always scams. So this guy, David Lester Straight, he calls himself, as far as I can ascertain, he is, in fact, sort of a real person. And here's how I know that. What you are looking at is the text from a court case. This text is publicly available information, so I don't believe I have to censor any names. This court case concerns Bonnie Ruth Allen Straight, the petitioner. Bonnie Ruth Allen Straight, as far as I can tell, is David Lester Straight's wife. She may not be, but it seems like she is. Anyway, let's read it together. Bonnie Ruth Allen Straight, an inmate currently incarcerated in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Correctional Institutions Division, was convicted in Johnson County, Texas, of carrying a weapon in a prohibited place. She was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment on May 5, 2023, following a revocation of her probation. See State v. Thomas. On May 11, 2023, an emergency writ of habeas corpus filed and signed on behalf of petitioner by David Lester Straight that appeared to assert both habeas and civil claims was received. Several affidavits and declarations from others relating to petitioner's allegations in this action were also received on May 16th and May 30th, 2023. By order dated May 23, 2023, petitioner was advised that David Lester Straight may not represent her in this action because it did not appear that he was licensed to practice law and he had not established the proprietary of next friend status. Doing oddly thorough research on internet weirdos is nothing new to me. I quite enjoy it. Going down these rabbit holes is very interesting to me. Just random people who say weird stuff online and seeing what weird stuff they have in their own history. In this particular case, what spurred me to do so much research was this. In his bio on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, David Lester Straight has this curious information. British-American psychologist, suicidologist, and emeritus professor of psychology at Stockton University. Stockton University is in the state of New Jersey, and David Lester Straight seems to be from Texas. He seems like he's from Texas, and he lives in Texas. So that, of course, set off some alarm bells. What is a emeritus professor at Stockton University in New Jersey doing in Texas? Selling sovereign citizen NESARA GESARA lies to people. And it turns out David Lester Straight stole somebody's valor. Notice anything familiar? David Lester is a British-American psychologist, suicidologist, and emeritus professor of psychology at Stockton University. Very curious. You may have noticed in that little Wikipedia snippet that David Lester, the real one, is in fact 82 years of age, and from pictures I've seen that he took recently, he looks it, which is not a knock on him. He is the victim here. I'm just saying that David Lester Straight, the man in the videos, is very clearly and blatantly not the same person as David Lester. David Lester Straight seems to be somewhere in his 60s, maybe early 60s, mid 60s. He looks a little bit rough, but hey, I'm sure I'll look a bit rough by then too. The important part here is that David Lester is a real person, and his valor is being stolen by this guy, in a sense. I know stolen valor is a term that relates to military service, but in this case, I think there's something really garish about stealing the identity of an 82-year-old man who apparently has a good academic career and who really cares about psychology and using that to sell your scam. Of course, this kind of thing happens all the time, and it's very sad that it does. But in this particular case, it's just a very oddly specific thing. It's a mystery to me whether David Lester Straight decided to name himself after David Lester, or if he was just similarly named and then decided to steal the other guy's valor after doing a Wikipedia search. Because yes, the guy is on Wikipedia. David Lester apparently has some mainstream cred in his fields. So it's a very fascinating thing. This is the conspiracy inside the conspiracy. And I understand it's not a major thing, it's not some incredible, earth shattering moment, but it does point to some problem with the conspiratorial mindset, I believe. Conspiracy theorists seem to be very good at questioning everything except their own biases, their own starting points, the places they come from. I think Lonnie, the person I mentioned earlier in this video, whose page acted as a rabbit hole by which I discovered this David Lester Straight thing, I think she's a great example of that because she and most of her followers are super Christian and super fundamentalist, albeit in very odd, almost Gnostic kind of ways. And because reality does not seem to be comporting with what they think it should, they have invented essentially an alternative universe. They have invented a whole new world in place of the actually existing world. As I mentioned earlier, their reality testing continually fails because they're not really doing it. They don't have a model of the world that actually works. Their predictive ability about the future of the world is very limited indeed, and when the world doesn't conform to their expectations, they just invent a new world or a new reason for it. For example, when Donald Trump didn't win the election in 2020, some of them called it voter fraud. Which, sure, fair enough, whatever, there's no evidence for that, but you can do that if you want. Much more suspicious is saying that, actually, Joe Biden died in 2021, and it's Donald Trump's people and the military that have controlled the United States, and they're all actors just showing you how bad it could get if Democrats win, or if Democrats had really won. But you have to ask, in that case, well, what's the difference? If you're getting the same policies regardless, what's the difference? And in fact, I'm kind of curious to see how it all shakes out if Kamala Harris wins, because these people are not going to know what to do with themselves. But the point I'm getting at here isn't about politics or anything like that. I'm just saying that the conspiratorial mindset has no way to cope with reality. In fact, the conspiratorial mindset is very often a way to escape reality. The big problem is, if you escape fundamental reality, if you turn away from the experts, if you turn away from science, if you turn away from consensus, if you turn away from the mainstream, who are you turning towards? Well, it just so happens, sometimes you're turning towards people like David Lester Straight, who aren't who they say they are, and who are just selling you lies that are very palatable to your ears. The world is a very uncomfortable place for all of us. It's very hard to find your place within it. I know that as much as anyone. But the solution to the world being hard is not to invent a new one. It's to figure out what the universe really is, what reality really is, to question your own biases, find out where you yourself may be wrong, and try to improve on that. And hopefully, through that process, you won't get taken for a ride like conspiracy theorists do. One final thought about conspiracy theories is this. This David Lester Straight thing is by no means unique. I've discovered plenty of cases of exactly this. This is just the first time I've thought about doing a video about it because I was pretty bothered by the fact that this guy is stealing the creds of somebody who really seems to care about his field and the work he does within it. I find that very offensive, but in some sense, there are a lot of people doing this right now. There's Graham Hancock, there's Bob Lazar, there's Terrence Howard, there's Eric Weinstein. There's all kinds of people out there doing exactly this same thing to various degrees of credibility. And when I say credibility, I mean pop credibility. Somebody like Graham Hancock is going to seem more reasonable to the average person than a Terrence Howard. A Bob Lazar may still seem pretty reasonable to people somehow. But they're not really credible. They're all basically on the same page. They're on a page that lacks evidence, that lacks support for the things they're saying. You fall for these people, and you are essentially falling for the same stolen valor as with this David Lester Straight character. This stuff is all over the conspiracy community. It's everywhere you turn. You are being misled if you are deeply involved in conspiracy theories, and I urge you, for your own sake, to stop inventing a new world that's more comfortable than the one we live in, and get back to the real world, as terrifying as it is. And I don't mean to talk down to anyone, because when I was younger, I dabbled in conspiracies too. I know how it is. I know how pleasing it can be to the senses. I know how thrilling it can be to assume you have inside knowledge. But really, I think living in the real world is much more interesting and fascinating and thrilling in the end. So, thanks for coming, thanks for being here. I hope you learned something from this video, but if you didn't, Well, I'm not much of an educator anyway. Have a great one.